And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show. Hope everybody is doing well, that you got some big Thanksgiving plans for tomorrow. I got a lot of news that I want to talk about today, a lot going on. I am rolling solo today. So as we're getting started here, everybody share out the show. If you're not already, subscribe on YouTube. Let us know that you're here with a comment in the chat. Always happy to see the regulars in there. Now, on today's show, want to talk about the Ukraine deal. A lot of aspects of that worth breaking down. Really want to take some time on it and explain to y'all what I think is going on there, both what we know publicly and what's happening behind the scenes. Mearsheimer, John Mearsheimer, the great professor, was attacked by Jeffrey Epstein. I'll explain the new reporting from Dropside there. And then a very fun thing to end it as we go into the holiday. I'm going to be breaking down some of Barry Weiss's insane recent comments. All right, so let's start off with Ukraine, where last week, end of the week, we get this leak that Trump has come up with a 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. And by looking at it, it looks like the basis of a deal that could potentially end the war in Ukraine. No NATO membership for Ukraine, but Kyiv can join the European Union. Ukraine has to make some territorial concessions, but most of that territory Russia has captured anyways, and the rest, well, Russia is currently taking territory, so seems like a relatively good exchange to end the war. Ukraine mostly gets to keep its sovereignty, some Russian funds going to rebuild Ukraine. Ukraine's military is capped, but at 600,000 troops, making it the second largest army in NATO, sounds like a very reasonable deal. Predictably, massive freak out in Europe among the American political elite and in Kyiv. Everybody is upset. This is a giveaway to Russia. Putin must have written this deal. Trump is just doing whatever Putin wants, is what they're going to say. Now, the Russians, they didn't celebrate it. They didn't say, oh, this is perfect, let's take it right here. But they did say, you know, this was in the spirit of what was discussed between Trump and Putin in Anchorage, Alaska earlier this year. And it could serve as the basis for a deal to end the war. So I got some statements from Trump, Putin, and Zelensky here to play, and then I'll give you some more analysis.
They're losing 25,000 lives over the last short period of time. I thought he should have made a deal a year ago, 2 years ago.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Ukraine may now face a very difficult choice, either losing its dignity or the risk of losing a key partner.
It has not been discussed with us in detail. The U.S. administration has so far failed to secure Ukraine's consent. Ukraine is against it.
Okay, so those are kind of the three leaders' reactions to the deal. Of course, this is proposed by Trump. Trump pledged to end the war on his first day in office. And while that was always clearly Trumpian campaign rhetoric, he's made absolutely no progress on this so far. So he is not living up to his campaign pledge in any way that you could stretch that word. So this has been so far a real problem for President Donald Trump, that he hasn't been able to progress towards his goal of ending the war in Ukraine. And so now he has this new proposal out there, and immediately it starts getting undermined by, allies within either his administration or the Republican Party. There's a couple of truly wild and baffling stories here. The first one is, it was Jeanne Shaheen, who's a Democrat from New Hampshire, senator, and very hawkish on the war in Ukraine. Angus King, an independent who does caucus with the Democrats, and also Mike Rounds, a Republican senator from South Dakota, all said that Marco Rubio told them that the 28 proposal put forward by Trump was written by Russia. Now, it wasn't. The Russians didn't say they would accept the deal as written in any way. So it was not written by the Russians. It seems to have been written by Steve Witkoff, Trump's personal envoy. But they used that attack to try to undermine the deal. It reeked of Russiagate propaganda, first of all. It just seemed like the same old story there. But when you think about it, you realize that this means either a senator in Trump's Republican Party was willing to join forces with Democrats to not leak to the Washington Post. It wasn't some unnamed senator say this. He put his face out there in front of the public and said that Trump's Secretary of State said the American president's peace plan was written by Russia. So either a member of his own party is really trying to tank and sabotage this deal, or the other possibility we have to consider, Marco Rubio really did say that to these senators, in which case Trump's top foreign policy advisor, his national security advisor, and Secretary of State is killing his peace plan behind his back to senators. Either way, this is a political problem for Donald Trump. But notice, he's lashing out at Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's attacking Rand Paul and Thomas Massie day after day after day. But all three of them would have supported this peace plan. Every word of it. They would have been applauding Trump and saying that this is great, but they're getting attacked for not being sufficiently supportive of Israel, while Trump isn't attacking Mike Rounds or the Democrats here. Very interesting how all that works out. A second thing that happened is British intelligence leaked that they intercepted calls between, it was Witkoff and a top advisor to Vladimir Putin, that said that Witkoff was basically giving the Russian advisor tips on how to deal with Donald Trump. So two things here. The scandal that the media is focusing on is they're pretending as if Trump's personal envoy is giving the Russians tips on how to manipulate Donald Trump, right? Like they're trying to explain to the Russians how to manipulate Trump. But that's not what he's trying to do, right? He's effectively acting like as a used car salesman who pretends that he's on the side of the buyers, right? And then he goes and talks to management and says, I can't get you that deal, right? This is the role that Witkoff is playing here. He's trying to be friendly with the Russians. He's trying to make it seem like he's on their side, but really he's just representing Donald Trump through all of this. Now, what should be a far bigger scandal is that British intelligence were spying on a top American official. That information got leaked and it's used to undermine the president. And again, Donald Trump is lashing out at all kinds of people he doesn't like 24/7. But where's the hatred for Keir Starmer? Where is him blasting the Brits, threatening 100% tariffs? None of that going on. Very interesting who gets away with undermining Trump's policy and who the president attacks. So, that's really important. And then, too, I should point out here the incompetence on behalf of the administration. You would think after the Signalgate fiasco, they would be very careful about how they're communicating. But again, we see that incompetence is still a large problem in Trump's campaign. Now, after this happens, Marco Rubio goes to Europe. He sits down with Zelensky's chief of staff and some Europeans, and they completely gut Trump's 28-point plan. They turn it into a 19-point plan. The Russians say they don't know. The public doesn't know what those 19 points say. They change some of the points that are existing in significant ways. Rather than Ukraine getting a vague security guarantee from the West, they're going to get an Article 5 style security guarantee, which of course will be very problematic from the Russians. They're walking back the territorial concessions from Kyiv. That's going to be problematic. They want to increase the cap on the Ukrainian armed forces. And so they're taking a deal that had real potential to get done. The possibility of actually being the basis for negotiations to achieve a peace and end the killing, and turning it into an absolute train wreck. Now, I'm making some excuses here for Donald Trump as to why his deal isn't getting done. The thing I have to say is, of course, if he wanted to, Donald Trump could end this war at any second, right? He has all the power, all the leverage. When he tells Zelensky that Zelensky doesn't have the cards, he doesn't, but Trump does, right? Like, he could tell the Ukrainians, no more military intelligence sharing. Not just we're going to stop selling the Europeans weapons, but we're going to stop telling you where the Russians are, where the attacks might be coming from. We're going to stop providing you intelligence with where Russian positions are, where Russian air defenses are, with information on how to evade those air defenses. We're going to take away all that. Ukraine would either lose the war immediately or they would have to accept whatever Donald Trump said. It's absolutely unbelievable that Trump won't put this pressure on Ukraine, that he won't give Zelensky the ultimatum. And you hear Zelensky there, and he's saying that we may have to choose between our dignity and, I think he says, losing a good partner. Well, the deal actually on the table now is going to be what leaves Ukraine with the most dignity intact, rather than if they continue to fight, particularly without the American support, and then are forced to negotiate at the barrel of a Russian gun. Look, the 28-point deal, it's worse than what Ukraine would have gotten had Joe Biden dealt in 2021 before Russia would have invaded. It's worse than Ukraine would have got had they negotiated in April of 2022 when there was a deal on the table. It was all but signed, and it didn't end up getting done because Boris Johnson in the West told Zelensky that we'll give you whatever you want for as long as you want. So this is this is a situation where it's not a good deal for the Ukrainians, but it's also the best deal that they're going to get. And they absolutely should take it for the betterment of their country. I don't think that's going to happen for a number of reasons. I'm not sure that Donald Trump understands how crucial it is to let Zelensky know, and probably let Putin know as well, that if we're going to get this deal done, it's probably going to require 100 or so American special operators or Green Berets or something like that to be deployed to Kyiv to defend Zelensky from the neo-Nazis that infest his government, not from the Russians, but from the nationalist, ethno-nationalist Ukrainians. That's a real part that has to be discussed in all this, that even if this deal is agreed to and Zelensky agrees to elections in a few months in Ukraine, he's going to need to be leader as this gets implemented. He's going to need to be giving the orders out that no, you won't advance, you're going to withdraw to here, to the various different troops. So without that support, I think Donald Trump might struggle to get that done. But this deal absolutely could get done. And look, Donald Trump should probably even tell the Ukrainian, or tell Zelensky, that he's not going to be running in this upcoming election, that Ukraine will be moving on from him. That would probably be what's best for the future of that country, particularly after the recent corruption scandals. All right. So that's kind of what I had on the Ukraine peace deal. The Ukrainians are rushing to get Trump to sign on to the 19-point peace plan and to make an official proposal submitted to Russia based on that over the Ukrainian holiday. Zelensky wants to come to the U.S. I really hope that doesn't happen. I hope Donald Trump understands that the way that Rubio and the Ukrainians and the Europeans changed his initial agreement is going to make it a non-starter for Russia. That way, he has some chance to make amends in order to get the deal into a condition where it could be the basis for an agreement. I kind of doubt that's going to happen. I think that Trump will probably sign on to this with Zelensky. The Russians won't take it. And then Donald Trump will kind of just keep doing what he's been doing, giving the Ukrainians some support, enough to keep them fighting, enough to keep them going, but certainly not to like the Joe Biden levels or anything like that. And eventually Ukraine will either face a military collapse due to a lack of money or manpower, at which point Russia will get to dictate the end of the war in the terms of Ukraine's surrender, rather than this negotiated settlement that would have at least kept Ukraine's sovereignty intact. All right, next up here, I absolutely had to talk about this on today's show. haven't been somebody for years and years and years who's covered Jeffrey Epstein. I, follow the news. I'm interested in it like most people are, but I haven't, dug that deep into it. But this story came up today from Dropsite News, and I think I have to talk about it. It's from Ryan Grimm, and Jeffrey Epstein aided Alan Dershowitz's attack on Mearsheimer and Walt's Israel lobby. And so what they're talking about here in 2006, Mearsheimer and Waltz, the professors, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, put together this article. It's initially, I think, like a 8,000 word article that was, I believe, supposed to be published at the Atlantic, where they go through and they discuss and they expose the influence that the Israel lobby has on the United States of America. Of course, now that later that was turned into a book that is an absolute must read for anybody in the audience who hasn't. Check out that book. But what this article by Ryan Grimm details is there was this massive campaign against Mearsheimer and Walt in their article, people saying that everybody has to renounce it, they have to condemn it as anti-Semitic, that outlets shouldn't run it or should run op-eds trashing the article and trashing the authors. And a part of that campaign was Alan Dershowitz, who famously justified receiving a massage from a young lady as saying, "I kept my pants on." And then he worked with Jeffrey Epstein to smear Mearsheimer and Waltz. And at the time, Epstein was heading one of Les Wester's big charities, and that charity was donating a lot of money to some school in Harvard. And so obviously this whole group has a lot of influence here, right? That Epstein, Dershowitz, they have a lot of influence on the academic conversation. And so I think it's really important that this probably isn't the biggest Epstein story out there. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with real crimes that Epstein committed, like the sexual trafficking, sexual abuse of minors, and the awful things that he did to those girls, and maybe blackmailing people and things like that on top of it. However, this does go to show just how nefarious of an actor Jeffrey Epstein was, and how so many people in elite circles were willing to stoop to his level and work with him to achieve their political ends. And you really have to wonder how much of the political conversation and discussion in this country has been shaped not just by people with ties to Jeffrey Epstein, but people who are using Jeffrey Epstein and his influence, right? If it turns out, and we look back on this in a few years, that a lot of our political leaders were not only maybe compromised by Jeffrey Epstein, but also working with him on political issues. We found out he was working on a potential election bid by a former Israeli prime minister to run for re-election in Tel Aviv. And so a lot of people went to Jeffrey Epstein to either rework their image, to get influence and things like that. So this, I think, is a big deal and something to really pay attention to. And just goes to show how much they really hate that book by Mearsheimer and Waltz. And if they hate it that much, it's something that you absolutely have to read. All right, so we're going to do something a little bit different here at the end of the show today. I have this clip of Barry White's. It's a little bit on the longer side, so I'm just going to play it in little segments, pause it as we go through it, and break down what the CBS editor-in-chief has to say. So let's start rolling the Barry Weiss clip.
All of us see the moment that we're in. And all of us see that the choices that it feels like we have sometimes, which is Hassan Piker and Tucker Carlson, or Nick Fuentes and, Andrew Tate, the kind of people that are rising in the podcast charts, those don't actually represent our values. And I don't think that they represent the values and the worldview of the vast majority of Americans. And so this is an opportunity to speak for the 75%, for the people that are on the center left and the center right that still believe in equality of opportunity.
So, this is astounding to me. First of all, she does the same kind of thing that we've seen time and time again, trying to conflate people on the right and on the left who have reasonable views on things and also oppose the state of Israel, with people who are genuinely hateful and problematic and also oppose the state of Israel. So there's no difference between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate and Hassan Piker. These people are all lumped into the same category when in reality, Tucker has made it very clear that he doesn't agree with or view the world in the same racialized way that Nick Fuentes does. Explicitly condemned his views on judging people by their race, ethnicity, religion, and things like that when he sat down with him. And yet, from Barry Weiss's perspective, they just all believe the same thing because they all oppose the state of Israel. Now, that part is frustrating, but we've heard that time and time again. The part that's really astounding to me is she's sitting there and she says 75% of Americans agree with us. Like she represents what the American people believe, when in reality, it's the American people, right? These are populist figures. Tucker Carlson isn't being put on everybody's TV screens every single night when they watch Fox News. People are going on YouTube, searching Tucker Carlson every single day because they want to hear what he has to say. He's a populist figure. Hassan Piker, disagree with the guy on the lot. He's a populist figure. People like him, they seek out their content. He's not being, put in a position that he should have never been in, and then his views forced upon an entire major TV network. Tucker Carlson doesn't have to do that to be multiple times more influential than Barry Weiss will ever be. Right. But Barry Weiss is sitting there pretending like she represents the consensus, that she understands the average American, and Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes just don't, when in reality, Nick Fuentes probably actually understands the average American far better than Barry Weiss does. Not that the average American agrees with Nick Fuentes, but he probably understands them better. And so these remarks from Barry Weiss just go to show how out of touch she actually is. Chris, let's keep rolling.
That still believe passionately in the American project, that still believe in all of the things that everyone in this room believes in, which is liberty and freedom and individual responsibility and in the most basic level, the right to know what is actually going on in the world. Not the world as propagandists and ideologues imagine it to be, but what's actually going on in the world and in your community, so you can make decisions about where to send your kids to school, about where to live, and about how to vote. That used to just be normal. And the goal of what we're trying to do at CBS is to get back to that normalcy. And I feel incredibly energized and enthusiastic because I think that is where the vast majority of Americans actually are.
All right, so we pause it there again. This, she doesn't say very much right there. And a lot of what she says is just jumble because she doesn't actually have anything to say. But she's really trying to emphasize that the American people agree with her, that they basically want to be propagandized. They want this very simple place that they could just go, get their informed opinion, know that they're right, and then they could, believe whatever they're told to believe. What she's upset about is that people now can actually go out and get their own information, that it doesn't require the three mainstream channels beaming in three different versions that are essentially the same of the state's narrative to every single American, but rather there's such a diversity of ideas that people really can now go out, seek, and find the truth. But just wait, guys, she was going to get into her calls for censorship as we keep playing.
So that articulation of that set of goals to speak into the lives of the 75%, how are you going to do that? What's your strategy for success?
So I think one of the problems is a lot of people have tried to do centrist news. I know this because I am like the target audience for those things. And the reason that they have all failed is it's like trying to force feed spinach down someone's throat, right? It's felt very like tofu, oatmeal. It's like centrist news is choosing the midpoint between every single topic. It's felt like an absence of charisma and identity. And as nostalgic as people might be for an era in which 30 million Americans every night watch Walter Cronkite and saw him as the voice of truth, and I understand why they're nostalgic for that, we're not going back to that. So how do you build trust in a moment of unbelievably low trust in all of our public institutions, especially the mainstream press? I don't think it's by pretending like we can go back to having a view from nowhere. I think it's about who's in the room, right? I think it's about redrawing the lines of what falls in the 40-yard lines of acceptable debate and
All right,
acceptable.
pause it there. So, how are we going to get everybody to agree on everything? We're just going to tell them all the same exact thing. There's going to be no free market of ideas, or people could go out and get their own information. We are going to limit, as she said, who's in the room. Who are the people who get to tell the Americans what to believe? I am going to handpick those people, and then those are the people that'll be put in front of the American people. And she basically is trying to say that what the American people have rejected is this idea of like, we have to have some kind of unbiased news, that we have to be in the center that way. But that's not what the American people have rejected. They have rejected the narrative from both the Democratic and the Republican establishment. It's not that they're rejecting the center as in compromise. They're rejecting the centrist of this country. The people who pretend to have disagreements on some fringe issues that they, even when they have all the power to resolve, never do, right? Like abortion or the tax code or immigration or healthcare. There have been both Democratic majorities in the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and same thing on the Republican side of the aisle. And magically, none of these parties ever implement the solutions that they always talk about on those issues, the issues that they supposedly disagree on. However, 2 or 3 times a year, everybody in the on both sides of the aisle effectively get together and they vote for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to go to all kinds of different, just corrupt causes, the military industrial complex, to big pharma, to banks, and they, the US government, the largest entity in history, continues to operate, right, with the consent of both Democrats and Republicans. So that's what the American people are rejecting. They're rejecting the centrist. They're rejecting personally the people on this stage. They are done with Ben Shapiro, with Barry Weiss, with CNN, with MSNBC, with Fox News. They're tired of the people who continue to, say we had to get rid of the Democrats because they have bad tax policy, but then they don't actually reform the tax code. And even though Trump supposedly opposed Biden's war in Ukraine, that's still going on right now, right? All right, so let's go back to Barry Weiss, because she has one more real
politics
gem in
and
here.
culture. I don't mean that in like a censorious gatekeeping way. I mean having people that are clearly identifiably on the center left and on the center right in conversation with each other. And we've been doing so much of this at the Free Press. I was in, where was I? Chicago last week, I think. I've lost all track of time, where Dana Lash, former spokeswoman from the NRA, was debating Alan Dershowitz on guns. Now, these are people that have wildly different opinions on the Second Amendment, and yet showing that they can have good faith, very passionate, very charismatic disagreement and still like each other at the end of the day. We think it's important. And so for me, it's always about the curation, like who's in the room, how are you showing?
All right, that's enough of this lady. So just to kind of wrap up here, her novel idea is to have debates between people on the center right and the center left. This isn't a novel idea. The dude sitting next to her, Ben Shapiro, debated gun control on CNN in 2010. Right? There used to be a CNN show, Crossfire, where they would have these debates multiple nights a week. It's not a novel idea that we're going to have people who agree on every issue but one or two sit down and discuss an issue that they're never going to resolve anyways. The problem is, the reason why people have rejected the media is because you've done just that. Because if you go on CNN, if you go on Fox News, they'll have a panel, There'll be a couple Democrats or Republican or the other way around, and they'll all be yelling at each other about all these issues. But at the end of the day, everybody in the room supports the war in Ukraine. They support the war in Israel. They support covering up the Epstein files. And that's, the narrative that Barry Weiss ultimately here, that's what she's trying to protect. She's trying to protect the American establishment. She's trying to protect the center. Ultimately, if she does what she says she's going to do, she's just going to destroy CBS and drive more and more people, hopefully to Tucker Carlson. That's the best bet, is that people end up where Tucker Carlson is and not where Nick Fuentes is. But they're going to keep conflating the two. That way, whenever somebody rejects CBS and they go out to look for an alternative, they're also going to look to Nick Fuentes, and then they could cry about the anti-Semitism problem that they helped to create. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show today. No show tomorrow. Everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving. We will be back next week with more episodes of the Kyle Anslow Show. Thanks, everyone.